Level 0, the world holds its breath. There is no breeze, no rustling leaves, no ripples on the surface of a lake. Smoke rises in a perfect vertical line as if frozen in time. This is level 0 on the Beaufort scale. Wind speeds are less than 1 kilometer per hour. Technically, air is still moving, but so slowly that even the most sensitive instruments struggle to measure it. To the human body, the atmosphere feels flat and heavy, like something has stalled above you. It is easy to mistake this calm for peace, but something about it feels wrong. The silence is too complete, too symmetrical. You notice the absence of movement more than anything else. In 2008, a fishing crew in the Bay of Bengal reported 18 continuous hours of dead calm. The sea was unnaturally smooth. Voices carried farther than normal. One of the crew members later described it as the loudest quiet I've ever heard. That's what level 0 does. It unnerves you. Calm conditions like this form when high-pressure systems settle overhead and atmospheric gradients flatten. Without contrast, there is no pull, no motion. But this state is temporary. The Earth does not tolerate stillness for long. Somewhere heat is rising, somewhere pressure is falling, somewhere a system is forming that will disturb this fragile equilibrium. Calm is not the natural state of the atmosphere. It is an illusion created by balance, and all balances eventually break. You are not standing in safety, you are standing in a pause. And pauses always end. Because the first moment the air begins to drift, even just slightly, the atmosphere stops watching. It starts moving. And once it moves, it does not stop. Level 1. The calm breaks, not with a gust or a roar, but with something so faint you almost don't believe it happened. A thread of smoke tilts slightly to the side. Leaves give the smallest shiver, then settle. On your skin you feel something pass, barely there, like a thought brushing against you. Wind speed is now between 1 and 5 kilometers per hour. This is level 1. Light air, not a breeze, not even a drift. Just the first sign that the atmosphere is beginning to move. To someone staring out at the sea, it looks like a promise. In the age of sail, ships trapped in still water would wait for this. The moment a ripple touched the surface, entire crews would scramble to adjust sails. In 2010, a yacht adrift off the coast of Sardinia sat motionless for nearly 2 days under a Beaufort 0 calm. When the first hints of level 1 arrived, it wasn't even enough to move them. But it was enough to break the silence. That was everything. Level 1 doesn't change your day. It does not shake trees or move waves, but it changes the atmosphere. It is the physical sign that a pressure gradient has formed somewhere. That heat and cold have begun their tug of war, that the air is no longer at rest. You cannot hear it, but you can see its effects if you look closely. Ash drifting sideways from a cigarette. The tiniest ripple reaching the edge of a puddle. Nothing is disrupted at this level, but something has begun. Light air is not a threat. It is a transition, and transitions build quickly, because at level 2, the air doesn't just move, it starts carrying the world with it. Level 2. Air begins to take shape. Leaves constantly rustle now. Grass bends in soft waves that roll across open fields. Wind speed rises to between 6 and 11 kilometers per hour. Still gentle, still easy to ignore. But level 2 is where the atmosphere starts to leave fingerprints. Smoke no longer floats upward. It bends. It moves with purpose. The direction matters now. At sea, the surface responds immediately. Tiny wavelets form, textured like scales across the water. No foam yet, but the ocean is no longer a mirror. It begins to reflect motion instead of just light. This level of wind can carry a scent for kilometers. It is enough to spread seeds, blow dust off dry soil, and whisper through cracks in windows. The breeze is light, but it is active. In 2017, a Saharan dust storm made headlines when it blanketed parts of southern Europe, including Spain and the United Kingdom, in a reddish haze. It was not caused by violent weather or high winds. It was persistent level 2 air stretching across thousands of kilometers, ferrying fine particles from one continent to another. The sky turned orange, solar panels dropped in efficiency. Even air quality alerts were triggered in cities far from any desert. The dust had no engine but the breeze. That is the quiet power of level 2. It travels, it connects regions. It reminds us that even the smallest movement in the air can shift the atmosphere somewhere else. You do not feel pushed by this breeze, you are simply aware of it. And once you are aware, you begin to wonder where it came from and where it's going. Because level 3 is not subtle. It does not drift. It drives. And it's just ahead. Level 3. The wind no longer waits for you to notice it. It meets you head on. Tree branches sway rhythmically. Flags extend and ripple. You feel your clothes tug as you walk into it. At 12 to 19 kilometers per hour, level 3 is still called a gentle breeze, but the word gentle starts to feel inaccurate. The air has momentum now. It has weight. It leaves no doubt that it is in control of your surroundings. On open water, this is when waves begin to rise in long, rolling patterns. The surface grows restless, marked by small crests that reflect and scatter light. Sailboats start to move with speed. Leaves skitter down sidewalks. The atmosphere is no longer simply passing through. It is pushing. In October 2020, a small brush fire near Napa Valley evolved into a fast-moving wildfire when consistent level 3 winds aligned perfectly with the terrain. The flames were not large at first, but the breeze fed them like oxygen to a furnace. Within hours, the fire grew from 20 acres to over 400. No explosive gusts, no storm system, just steady wind with a clear direction. That is the quiet danger of this level. It gives everything a nudge. A spark becomes a blaze, a loose object becomes a projectile, a calm surface becomes unstable. Wind at this speed is often overlooked because it does not roar or scream, but that makes it even more dangerous. It slips under the radar. It helps small problems become big ones before anyone reacts. At level 3, the air is no longer background. It is part of the equation. It influences flight, flame, pollen, pollution, and even mood. And once the wind starts shaping the environment, it does not stop. Level 4 is where it takes command. Level 4, wind stops being gentle. It starts making decisions for you. At 20 to 28 kilometers per hour, level 4 is called a moderate breeze, but it no longer feels casual. Tree limbs move constantly. Dust lifts off dry ground and twists down streets. Flags snap and pop like whips. If you ride a bike, you feel this wind lean into you. If you walk into it, you have to push back. This is the level where the atmosphere begins to reshape the world in subtle, persistent ways. At sea, waves grow larger and begin to break. Their tops turn to foam. The ocean stops gliding and starts flexing with muscular movement. On land, doors slam shut unexpectedly. A napkin on a table becomes a chase. You begin to see motion everywhere because the wind is always doing something. In July 2012, during what should have been a routine sailing event on Lake Ontario, level 4 winds caused 5 boats to capsize in one afternoon. These were not amateur sailors and the conditions were not classified as dangerous, but steady wind across open water creates instability. One small miscalculation becomes costly when the breeze refuses to let up, when it keeps pushing, when it insists. This level doesn't knock things over on its own. What it does is add pressure to every structure, every plan, every system. Dry grasses dry faster, smoke travels farther, waves stack up. The power is not in the gusts. It is in the duration, the consistency, the slow build of force that turns manageable situations into unpredictable ones. You don't need a storm to feel the effects of level 4, you just need time. Because at level 5, wind stops pushing around objects. It starts pushing back at people. Level 5. By this point, the wind is not asking for space. It is taking it. Speeds rise to 29 to 38 kilometers per hour. Everything around you begins to shift in response. Trees bow with real weight. Flags pull against their halyards with a constant, urgent force. Light objects no longer drift away. They launch. This is the kind of wind that turns a calm afternoon into a reason to close the windows. On the street, pedestrians move differently. Hair blows into faces, jackets press against backs, conversations cut off mid-sentence. People shout across short distances, not out of anger, but because the air is too loud. If you are cycling, you feel it in your legs. If you are on water, you feel it in your balance. Waves push past 2 meters. Whitecaps stretch to the horizon. In 2019, a yacht race near Sydney faced precisely this level of wind. 2 boats capsized during what was supposed to be a routine course. Not because of a freak gust, but because the pressure never let up. Crews battled the wind for hours until one wrong tilt sent them over. The conditions were expected. That did not make them any less punishing. This is where wind begins to impose rules. Tarps tear, roof tiles clatter loose. Construction zones grow uneasy. What held up yesterday might not survive today. And it never arrives with drama. That is what makes it dangerous. You feel it build, but you do not realize how far it has come until something moves that should not have. It is not violent. It is relentless. And if you think it is strong now, you have not yet seen what happens when the wind begins to roar. Level 6. This is the point where wind stops feeling like weather and starts acting like pressure. At 39 to 49 kilometers per hour, it is no longer a background condition. It becomes a presence. The sound alone is constant, a low rush that never fades. Trees thrash, branches bend hard and begin to creak. Power lines whistle. Your coat flaps violently against your body, and every step forward is a decision. Outdoors, you feel smaller. On wide roads or open fields, there is nothing between you and the force. It pushes from all directions. Walking in a straight line takes effort. You cannot ignore it anymore, and if you try, it reminds you quickly. Debris starts to shift across pavement. Sand kicks up and stings the face. People lean forward instinctively, trying to reduce their surface area. In 2023, ferry services across several Greek islands were suspended after strong breeze conditions made docking unsafe. Boats were not sinking. The problem was precision. You cannot land a vessel safely when the wind keeps pushing it sideways. That is what makes this level so difficult. It is not wild or chaotic. It is consistent, stubborn, and exhausting. Temporary signs start to topple. Scaffolding groans. Construction tarps rip from their seams. For emergency services, this is the level where caution begins to scale up. Fire crews watch for red flag conditions. Pilots adjust approach speeds. City workers secure equipment before it becomes airborne. Wind at this level is not dramatic enough to draw crowds, but it is strong enough to endanger the ones who are still watching. The environment has turned hostile without ever raising its voice. And just ahead lies the threshold where the wind stops resisting you and begins tearing things loose without warning. Level 7. At level 7, the wind stops being a presence and becomes an assault. Speeds reach 50 to 61 kilometers per hour. You no longer just feel it against you, you brace for it. Trees sway wildly, whole trunks flexing under pressure. Loose branches snap and fall. This is the first time the wind feels like it has intent. It does not pass through, it grabs, it pulls, it strips. On city streets, signs twist in their mounts. Trash bins roll away. People abandon umbrellas entirely because resistance is pointless. Walking becomes effort, like moving upstream in fast water. You are no longer choosing your direction. You are negotiating it. In 2018, near Gale winds hit the coast of northern Germany, toppling scaffolding and sending debris flying across public squares. Flights were delayed, rail services were halted, power lines failed under the repeated stress, and none of it was part of a named storm. This was just wind. Strong enough, sustained long enough. That is all it takes. Out at sea, wave height approaches 4 meters. Ferry routes shut down. Offshore platforms enter standby protocols. Even rescue helicopters are grounded when winds like this collide with unstable terrain. During a training mission in Cornwall, wind deflected off cliff faces so violently that crews had to abort mid-operation. They could not land safely. The air had become too aggressive. This level doesn't just damage. It starts to interrupt systems. Transportation, infrastructure, communication, all begin to bend under the constant force. Not because of gusts, but because of persistence. When you are standing in it, you are not just feeling wind. You are standing in the boundary between normal weather and the early stages of structural failure. And from here, things only get louder, sharper, and faster. Level 8. This is the point where the wind no longer negotiates. It takes. At 62 to 74 kilometers per hour, level 8 marks the beginning of a full gale. Trees bend violently. Larger branches snap and fall. Power lines swing like jump ropes straining at their anchors. Windows rattle constantly, and the sound of the wind becomes a roar that you cannot speak over. Outside, movement becomes limited. Bicycles are nearly impossible to control. Small vehicles shift in their lanes. Street signs warp or shear off entirely. Roof tiles loosen. Lightweight construction is no longer safe. Anything not bolted down becomes a projectile. You do not walk across open spaces in this kind of wind. You lower your head and move with caution, or you stay inside and listen to the sound of pressure battering your walls. At sea, conditions are far worse. Waves rise above 5 meters and break with crushing force. Spray blows horizontally. In 2005, a severe gale struck the port city of Toulouse, France. Though it was not officially classified as a storm, the wind tore off rooftops, uprooted trees, and sent debris flying through the city center. Glass shattered. Public transportation shut down. Emergency services received more than 800 calls in a single day. This is not hurricane territory. This is not a freak event. It is just wind, sustained at the threshold where everyday life stops functioning. The danger is not from a single gust, but from hours of unrelenting force. Everything that is slightly loose, slightly weakened, slightly vulnerable begins to fail. Structures, schedules, nerves. Gale force wind does not ask for attention. It takes it by force. And while most people are looking for shelter, the wind is still gaining strength. Somewhere beyond this, it stops damaging the world and starts breaking it apart. Level 9. The landscape does not just move anymore. It begins to fall apart. At 75 to 88 kilometers per hour, level 9 is classified as a strong gale, but that name barely contains what it feels like. This is the level where fences collapse, roofs peel like paper, and tree trunks split. You cannot walk in a straight line. You cannot ride a bike. Cars begin to rock in place. The air itself has mass now, and it is throwing that weight in every direction. On land, damage becomes widespread. Signs rip free. Sheet metal lifts. Entire sections of scaffolding crumple. In 2021, northern Germany was hit with strong gale winds that derailed trains, uprooted hundreds of trees, and knocked out power to thousands. Roads were blocked, flights were diverted. Across cities like Hamburg and Bremen, Streets were littered with broken glass and twisted metal. And this was not a hurricane. There was no official storm warning at first, just a forecast for very strong wind. At sea, conditions border on violent. Waves reach 6 to 7 meters and begin to crash over the decks of larger ships. Rescue operations are delayed or canceled entirely. Ports close. Coastal towns brace for inland flooding caused by wind-driven surges. Communication towers sway under pressure. Some fail. At this point, wind is no longer something moving through the environment. It becomes an event in itself, a system with presence and power capable of dismantling infrastructure simply by showing up and staying. Even solid structures reveal their flaws under this kind of stress. People begin to take cover not because they were told to, but because instinct tells them to move. When the air rips past you loud enough to drown out your thoughts, you know what comes next is not just stronger, it is something worse. Level 10. Everything outside is in motion. Trees no longer bend, they break. Branches twist, snap, and fly. Roofs lift at the edges like they are trying to take off. Whole sections of fencing and siding rip free from buildings. Wind speeds now reach between 89 and 102 kilometers per hour. This is level 10 on the Beaufort scale. Officially, it is called a storm. Unofficially, it feels like a controlled collapse of the environment around you. You cannot stand in this wind without being pushed. Walking turns into staggering. Rain does not fall, it slams sideways mixed with dirt, leaves, and fragments of everything the wind has taken. In urban areas, glass blows out of windows. Power lines drop. Entire intersections go dark. Sirens begin to overlap. This is no longer a weather pattern you respond to with an umbrella or a coat. This is the kind of wind that clears streets, empties skylines, and silences cities. In 2013, Storm Christian struck northern Europe with Beaufort, 10 winds. In Copenhagen, cranes buckled. In Hamburg, massive shipping containers tumbled like toy blocks. Flights were grounded. Highways closed. Over a dozen people were killed not by flood or fire, but by the sheer violence of the air. At sea, waves exceed 8 meters. Ships reroute or ride it out, unable to dock safely. Coastal regions experience flooding from wind-driven surge alone. Offshore oil platforms brace against force that tests their engineering. Equipment breaks, anchors drag, people go silent on radios, waiting for it to pass. There are higher levels on the Beaufort scale. But for most places, this is the upper limit before everything stops working. Not because it cannot go further, but because systems begin to fail. And when systems fail, it is not just wind anymore. It is survival.